Welcome to the USC channel here at the Voice of College Football. Matt Zemek with Ethan Inman and Crashlet Collier. So no game to review, though I think we will review that Big Ten championship game later in the show, because obviously USC wants to measure itself against the best. What did we take away from that game? There's a Jeremiah Smith, Mekhi Lemon Boletnikoff Award angle that we're certainly going to talk about. This is award week in college football. So we'll touch on national topics as they relate to USC. But of course, the first topic, the main topic, the topic on everyone's mind at USC, the transfer portal. And so there's a steady procession of players out the door. And Ethan and Crash, we'll get into the specific names as we go along. We can deal with each name. You can give your take on each player. But just on a general level, just broadly speaking, Ethan first, Crash second. Is there any departure where you're going, we can't afford that? Or can you live with each of these portal departures knowing that for every exit, there's an entrance on the other side? Ethan first, Crash second.
I think so far I've felt pretty good about how things are going. I mean, obviously, there's some guys that fans are attached to and you want to see stick around and become really good. I mean, someone that comes to mind for me is Matai Taguai, because I know a lot of fans are really sad to see him go because they saw a lot of potential in him, and so you're always going to have cases like that for sure. But I feel like so far generally, they're I feel pretty confident that USC will be able to replace that talent, whether it is through the freshmen that they've gotten or through the transfer portal. And it feels like, there's no guys that yet, in my opinion, where it's like where like USC fans are or really should be angry at them or anything like that. Like it feels like, they're all guys who didn't have a ton of opportunity at USC, so they're hopefully going to go and have more opportunity elsewhere. And USC should be able to kind of fill in the gaps so far, at least. That's how it feels for me.
I agree with Ethan that I think in general, it's like, yeah, it's just kind of how college sports are now, especially with just for every guy you bring in, you're going to lose a guy. Although one area, I guess maybe I have a little bit of concern, I guess maybe is Micah Banuelos leaving, especially considering he kind of had to come in a few times and make some starts, especially as different guys were getting injured throughout the year, especially when Elijah Page went down. He'd always be in and they'd move a couple other guys around. So I guess just him, especially just what I've learned about O-lines and just sometimes just having that continuity, just those guys being more comfortable, I guess maybe is a little bit troubling, but I guess at the same time, if they can get someone who can come in and be really solid, or if Zach Hanson can have another year like he had where just if one guy goes down, another guy steps up, then I guess I won't be so worried. But just on the surface, with what I've learned from talking to offensive linemen now in the NFL, that it can sometimes be a bit alarming when you see a guy who had to step up and play a critical role when other guys were injured and possibly could have been in line for a bigger role next year walk out the door.
So, continuing this conversation, is there a position group where, departures leave you concerned generally in terms of the depth in that room? Obviously, again, portal pieces, it's a study in moving parts. So like there's certainly the expectation that whatever USC loses on the front end, it's going to be able to replenish on the back end. But, not all position groups are created equal. Not all situations are the same. Ethan, then Crash, any concerns about depth just based on, the current portal tally and perhaps other potential exits coming soon in the next few weeks?
Yeah, I think for me, it's probably linebacker, just because you had Matai Tagovailoa leave, you had Garrison Madden leave, you have Anthony Beavers Jr. also set to depart. So that's three guys in the linebacker room, and the linebacker room had its share of struggles already this year anyway. And we don't on this podcast really have a lot of faith in Rob Ryan's coaching. So who knows, if those players were really good and they had a lot of potential, but they were buried on the depth chart because the talent evaluation was poor or the coaching was poor. So that to me feels like the biggest concern, especially because the room wasn't very deep already anyway. But USC has some good recruits coming in, and hopefully they'll be able to go out in the transfer portal as well. But yeah, I think if there's one area of concern for me, it's definitely at the linebacker position for sure.
I certainly agree with Ethan that the linebacker room is especially going to be a concern, especially with kind of every day that passes. It does seem more likely that Rob Ryan is coming back. But I think also another room that I want to focus on that had some struggles earlier on in the year, also but on the defensive side of the ball, is the secondary. I think just especially, well, it got definitely steadied, got a little better, even with Kamari Ramsey out or playing nickel or just not really being in the true safety position where he's clearly the most comfortable. I still think just he's probably most likely gone this year. So I think just especially having someone who really just can come in quickly, like if USC's going to really need someone who can come in quickly and just be a veteran leader. So really, I think the area that's going to be most concerning, especially as we start to see more portal departures, is going to be, I think, that secondary and like who can step up, who do they get, and who walks out the door.
All right, let me follow up on the linebacker room. Crash made the point, it's an important one, that, if nothing's been done by this point, Rob Ryan is probably coming back for 2026. It raises the question, is this flood of portal departures at linebacker kind of the defensive staff's way of saying, you guys weren't receptive to Rob Ryan's coaching? It's not us, it's you. Kind of feels harsh, but do you think that's part of this? That if they're not firing Rob Ryan and you see a ton of linebackers leave, that kind of gives me the feeling that the defensive coaches liked their plan. They liked their approach. Danton Lynn thought Rob Ryan was, teaching the right things, the right concepts, and the people in the room weren't soaking things up the right way. But there's only so much you can say or do, right? When, CJ Carr struggles throwing the ball for Notre Dame and you're giving up over 300 yards. I mean, it can't just be on the players, right? There has to be some basic element of competence and some basic element of, damage control. And is this kind of the USC staff's way of saying, hey, thank you for your service. You leave. We're happy with Rob Ryan. I mean, how are you seeing that dynamic, Ethan, then Crash?
I don't know. It's a really interesting question. I think there is a lot of linebacker talent coming in the 2026 recruiting class. Talanoa Ely is obviously kind of the headliner there. So maybe, I don't know, maybe it's somewhere in the middle. Maybe they're kind of punting on this current class, and they just think that the next class will be better suited for this coaching staff. I don't know. It's not necessarily I think if we were seeing like Desmond Stevens and Jaden Walker transferring out, then maybe we'd have some more questions, because those guys were obviously starters and they were obviously their struggles were more in the spotlight, I would say, than some of these other guys who didn't play as much. So yeah, I mean, I think it's a situation to watch. It's not one that I have any definitive opinions on right now, but it sure will be interesting to see, because obviously I don't think we're done getting news on people departing, and we're certainly not done getting news on people coming in. So it'll be interesting to see how that room continues to take shape and what we can derive from that in the future.
I absolutely agree. I think it's definitely more of a complicated answer, Matt, because on the one hand, yeah, you could just be like, oh, Rob Ryan, oh, I'll talk, oh yeah, let's go win games. On the one hand, yeah, I get that maybe they could be thinking, all right, maybe it's just the players. And I mean, on the one hand, you do realize what helps make a good coach great is the players. But on the other hand, you could also argue that maybe just Rob Ryan isn't teaching it well. And they're just like, all right, if they're not going to get rid of him and I need to learn and develop, I need to go somewhere else. But I think really the question when this is really going to be answered is, who do they bring? Obviously, the guys coming in via recruiting, via high school are going to be crucial, but also who do they get from the transfer portal? Can they, with Rob Ryan as the linebackers coach, can they pick up somebody credible in the transfer portal? If they can do that, then I think maybe then things could definitely look better if they can get better guys. But if they can't, if, they're kind of having to rely on these incoming freshman recruits or kind of settling in the transfer portal for guys to play linebacker, then I think it's certainly a concern. So it's really, I think, who they bring in, I think, is really going to answer the question of how I think Rob Ryan will do next year. Since, like I said, it very much looks like he will be coming back with every passing day he isn't fired.
All right, another basic transfer portal question that we have to ask, and if players or friends of players are watching this, none of this is meant as an insult. Coaches are making evaluations. This is a cutthroat business. Coaches are going to say that some players are valued enough to stick around. Some other players is, you just need to seek an opportunity elsewhere. Good luck. Thank you for, being part of our program. So it's not an insult to explore this. This is just the cold, cruel, calculating reality of player evaluation. Is there any player that you would actually want to see transfer out with the expectation or hope that a better piece comes in? I would imagine that most of these are on the defensive side of the ball, given what we saw this past season. But there's also the competing thought process on the other side of it, that this was a young defense. It took a long time to soak up concepts, and maybe next year is the leap year. Next year's the year for the growth, the bounce. How do you weigh that against the idea of, if this guy left in the portal, it's actually good. We can get an upgrade. It would be better for all parties. How do you weigh these two fundamental competing tensions that are part of not just this transfer portal season, every transfer portal season in the modern era of college football? Ethan first, Crash second.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really tough question, obviously, because I tend to be someone who, hopes for the best for everybody within the program that I root for. Like, being a USC fan, I always want everyone who chooses USC to be rewarded for it, and to come here and have a ton of success and just kind of, maximize their potential as Trojans. I think there's I think it's hard for me to pick out any one player who, I think it would be better off transferring, just because it is most of the players who I would highlight had a lot of struggles this past year are all really young, and also I don't know if they even would have played if USC hadn't have had injuries, because a lot of them are in the secondary, like Marcellus Williams and Braylon Conley, who is transferring out, and others kind of in that category. So I think that's really up to the coaching staff, and I think that it'll be interesting to see. I think we have seen. I don't think that there's been too many surprises in it. I think maybe Braylon Conley is the biggest surprise, just because he did get some playing time this year of anyone transferring out. But everybody else who's transferring out at this point feels like they didn't get a ton of playing time. Maybe you could argue Brian Jackson, has gotten some flashes of playing time. So I would assume that there are some cases in there of the coaching staff, letting the players know that they're better off suited, to go elsewhere. It'll be interesting to see if, it's kind of like I said earlier, it'll be interesting to see if we see some players who got a little bit more playing time start to hit the portal, because then that'll really start to tell us what the staff thinks of them, and also what they think of the staff, and kind of be able to dive into that conversation a little bit more.
I'm with Ethan, Matt, where I think it's kind of tricky for me to just kind of point out one guy. Obviously, I think I care a lot about him, especially since they, go to USC. Like Ethan said, as a fan, it's like you want to see those guys who pick USC be rewarded for it. I think Ethan makes a great point there. But at the same time, I think it's also kind of tricky where it's like sometimes you're like wondering, like you said, Ethan, guys are young, guys can develop. Sometimes it just takes that year of getting into college. That said, though, I think kind of if there are guys who are leaving either due to lack of playing time or just inconsistent play, I guess I can kind of see that, especially if, it was kind of a guy that kind of struggled, or just, especially if, USC has someone promising that they think they can land and bring in. But that said, though, I think it's kind of tricky to kind of put any specific names, especially because you kind of want those guys who've bought into the vision, bought into USC to be rewarded. I think Ethan makes a great point there. So I think it's kind of tricky to name anyone, but I'm not opposed if, it does, I guess, I'm sorry if this sounds a little heartless, comes kind of at that cost of, getting, I guess, an upgrade, you could say, a better player, someone who can come in and immediately make an impact, especially on the defensive side of the ball, where it's going to be very critical in year 5 for Lincoln Riley.
All right, Austin G here and also Bob Springer have both made this point in the chat. Let's address it. Interior defensive line is the problem. It's tough to play linebacker with DTs pushed in your lap. I'm not criticizing anything here. I'm just pointing out that didn't seem to be the flow of the conversation over the course of the season, that the linebackers were basically being left hung out to dry by the defensive line. I'm not pushing back against that. I'm just saying that in real time, when we reviewed the Illinois game, when we reviewed the Notre Dame game, when we reviewed the Oregon game, obviously the defensive line was not up to standard, not even close in each of those games. But the way we talked about those games, the three of us, and the way fans reacted to those games, that was not really the sense I got from how the USC community was processing those games relative to the linebacker unit. There was a sense that the linebackers were not wrapping up, that they were not making tackles when they were there to be made. Absolutely, the defensive line put the linebackers in difficult situations on a relatively consistent basis. But that wasn't the whole story, and it didn't feel like the final verdict on the linebacker room, that if the defensive line was better, well, then the linebackers would have been fine. That's not how it was at the time. Again, I'm not criticizing what was the reaction or what was the general consensus at the time in early October, in late October after South Bend, in mid-October after Eugene, the trip to Oregon. I'm just saying that's what it was. That was the response. I didn't see people approving of Rob Ryan's job performance during the season, as though this is all Coach Henny's fault. And Rob Ryan was holding up his end. I'm just saying, again, not being critical of anyone here, just that wasn't the immediate reaction. So I'm just saying what I'm seeing from Austin, what I'm seeing from Bob Springer, to me, represents a shift in the conversation. I'm not saying that's bad. I'm not saying it's inaccurate. It could be accurate. Ethan, Crash, what do you think?
I'd be interested to go back and watch some game film. But I think that there's a potential point just when you kind of think about how this defensive line performed, because I think that, you think about USC not being able to stop the run. And, there were some games where it felt like it was pretty clearly a linebacker problem. Like the Oregon game comes to mind because it felt like Oregon ran like maybe 15 to 20 outside runs in that game, and USC didn't stop a single one. Like that felt like a linebacker problem to me, just because, obviously it's not the defensive tackle's fault if, they're not positioned on the outside. They can't get there. But, at the same time, you think about the Notre Dame game, and what was so frustrating about that one, and to some degree the Illinois game as well, is that Notre Dame wasn't running anything particularly complicated. It was just kind of Jeremiah Smith up the gut, or Jeremiah Love. Sorry, yes, Jeremiah Love.
We don't want to give Jeremiah Smith any more recognition or attention than he deserves. Damn it!
No, I have Jeremiah Smith on the mind. I have Jeremiah Smith on the mind because I wrote about him earlier today at Trojans Wire.
We all do.
Go check that out.
Because he needs to lose. He needs to lose that award vote.
Speaking of Jeremiahs who are up for an award, Jeremiah Love. He was just, he was running it up the gut, and it wasn't really particularly complicated, and USC was getting bullied on the defensive line. And we've talked about in the past, kind of as the season wound down, that like, man, the defensive line started out playing so well, and then USC played Illinois, and then it never really felt like they were dominant after that. So, and then I think another thing that I think about when I think about Austin and Bob's point is just the players who make up USC's defensive tackle unit. And, it feels like Jakeem Stewart showed flashes, and it feels like Devin Tompkins showed flashes, and then it feels like everyone else was relatively disappointing. I mean, Jamal Jarrett was hurt for most of the year. I know Keyshawn Silver was in and out with some injuries, but even when he did play, he kind of fell down the depth chart. Floyd Boucard obviously was dealing with some injuries too. And then now you have Carlon Jones leaving. Abasiri, another guy who's just kind of, neither here nor there. So, I mean, yeah, I think it certainly could have an impact. I think I would hesitate to say that the linebacker play was all the defensive line's fault because, like I said, there's clearly some games in my mind where that can't have been the case because it was outside runs over and over and over again that USC was just out of position on. But certainly, like it could have been a factor. I am willing to believe that and to go back and watch some tape and investigate that further.
I think kind of, and I think Bob actually makes a good point of like, you know what? I think in the heat of the moment, right as we're all frustrated, we just kind of look at one thing as fans and we're just like, damn it, that's the problem. That's the problem. We got to fix that. We got to fix that. Come on, like, let's go. Like, that's the problem. It's linebackers. It's linebackers. Fire Rob Ryan. Fire Rob Ryan. And I'm not saying I'm not saying like, you know what, that's unwarranted. I mean, I will own it. I have called for Rob Ryan to be fired multiple times, and I've imitated him like half a dozen times on this show. You're right there with me, Matt. But at the same time, I think now the season's over, and USC fell short of the playoff. I think it is fair to go back, rewatch games, and maybe look at all right. I'm not saying like I'm not letting the linebacker room off the hook here. But at the same time, I think it's also fair to evaluate, okay, what else went wrong? Were they kind of put in tough situations? Like, were there cracks in the D-line? So I think Bob actually makes a pretty fair point, especially now that we're at the end of the season. All we got left is the bowl game. To where, you know what, it's really, I think you got to look at the other areas of like, all right, where are things going wrong? And I think Bob's comment about 5-6 minutes ago, he said, this is a business nowadays too. So the staff has to look at its investments. I think is a great point, Bob, because if you're not, that could be the area where you're going to get beat up next year. So I think it's very fair to go back and just critically evaluate all areas. And if you're seeing flaws in the D-line, even if the majority of the blame, and I will stand by this, is on the linebacker room and Rob Ryan, I think you still got to obviously correct the mistakes elsewhere too, because if not, then it's going to be the D-line. That's the problem. Then we'll be calling for Eric Henderson to go next year. So really, I think Bob makes some really smart points that I think are definitely worth talking about as we are. And I think it really just shows that just if USC is going to make the playoff next year, they got to look at the entirety, not just of the defense, but also the offense as well as the special team, all three phases of the ball to become a better football team, a playoff caliber football team next year.
Where I'm see now again, I've noted a shift in the conversation. I'm not saying it's bad, and where I'm definitely 10,000% in agreement with Bob Springer and Austin G is that defensive line is the most important unit on the 2026 USC roster by far. It's not even close. It is not even close. Like everyone else is playing for second. Pete Carroll's ascendancy in 2002 going into 2003, that 23-0 shutout of Auburn in 2003, like that was the click clack. We're coming into your crib and we're just raiding everything. We're wiping you out. We're taking no prisoners. It all started up front. It all started with Wild Bunch 2. It all started with, Sean Cody and all the other just home wreckers up front. Like that is a cornerstone of great USC football, just having a filthy McNasty defensive front four. So that is where it all starts. So you're not going to get any disagreement with me on that. My Rob Ryan critique and why I still think he should be fired is simply this. Matt Entz got a lot out of that linebacker room, and he had Eric Gentry for only 1 month in 2024. I mean, he instantly got the most out of Eric Gentry in 1 month. And it took all season for Rob Ryan to not even he didn't max out anyone in that room. So Matt Entz set the bar at a fairly high level. I'm not going to say highest possible level, but like year one, pretty damn good job for a guy stepping into a position coach role at a high-profile program, inheriting the god-awful mess Alex Grinch left behind. Matt Entz set the bar high, and Rob Ryan did not come appreciably close to it. And just that, to me, is okay. Rob Ryan's not the best we can do. At USC, it should only be the best. And Lincoln Riley retaining Alex Grinch in 2023 was not going with his best, and it set the program back. So that is my simple Rob Ryan critique, but I am absolutely 10,000% in agreement with Bob Springer and Austin G that it's the defensive line. It's on the defensive line. It's on Coach Henne, woof, woof, to do the dog work and be the leaders of this team. They can't be dragged along on a leash. No, they need to be barking, and they need to be barking all season long. And may I add, and actually we'll talk more about USC in the portal, but let's take this time as kind of a segue. Since we're talking about the defensive line, let's segue into the Big Ten championship game and what USC fans learned from it. And so my segue is obvious, right? Defensive line play. Like, you had two nasty defensive lines in that game. And Indiana under Cignetti is 13-0, number one seed in the playoff. Primarily not because of Fernando Mendoza, scored only 13 points. It's because Indiana has an elite, god-tier, beast mode defensive line. An amazing stat I saw. I don't know, Ethan or Crash, if you picked this one up, but in the whole season, so 25 total games. Ohio State played 13. Oregon played 12 because Oregon didn't make the Big Ten title game. So in 25 total games, Ohio State and Oregon combined, their offensive lines allowed 25 sacks. So basically 1 sack a game. So those offensive lines were excellent in terms of protecting their quarterbacks this season. Of those 25 sacks that Ohio State and Oregon allowed combined, Indiana generated 11. Indiana basically created half the sacks that two playoff teams, two one-loss teams, Ohio State 12-1, Oregon 11-1, Indiana basically had half the sacks that Ohio State and Oregon allowed the whole season. That is how absolutely dominant Indiana's defensive front is. So my takeaway from the Big Ten title game is, you have to have an elite defensive line if you really, really want to compete with the big boys. And so Ohio State and Indiana, just in terms of defensive line play, not talking about any other position groups, their offenses are vulnerable and flawed. Like USC has a better offense than Ohio State and Indiana do. But defensive line, like those two programs, Ethan Inman, Crashlet Collier, miles ahead of USC, and that is really where the Trojans have to catch up. Comment on that and any other takeaways from the Big Ten championship game. Ethan first.
Well, yeah, I think I've been thinking about this topic a lot the past few days because of the Big Ten championship, and because I wrote a piece at Trojans Wire as well about Oklahoma making the playoff post Lincoln Riley before Riley's USC made the playoff. And I think the lesson that USC fans can take away from those two situations is the same. I mean, defense wins you college football playoff appearances. I think the stat that I discovered when I was writing that story is 10 of the 12 college football playoff teams have a top 20 defense in the country. And one of the two that does not is Tulane. So if you're in a big conference and you want to make the college football playoff, you have to have a great defense. It just seems it was a requirement this year. It was a requirement that USC did not meet, and therefore they didn't make the playoff. I think it's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. We've talked about Indiana's great defensive line, all the sacks that they generate, 39 sacks total on the season. There's three teams ahead of Indiana. Two of those teams are in the college football playoff, and those teams are Oklahoma and Texas A&M. So, defensive line play, not only great defensive play, but great defensive line play is really fueling a lot of teams this year. And it's a really interesting kind of national story, just the value of defensive line in 2025 for making college football playoff. It's really, really been important to basically every team that's competing for a championship this year.
Yeah, so I agree that I think it's really just from what I saw that game, it just shows how just critical it is. And it's just, if you want to play Big Ten football, you want to play big boy football, you got to have a defense. You guys got to have a defensive line that's just going to be able to just get past, just completely wreck your offensive plan. And I think that's just what it showed, especially with how Indiana was just able to, take care of business. Obviously, I mean, it was a real defensive game, and I think that was kind of the consensus. Obviously, I mean, you have two Heisman finalists in Fernando Mendoza and Julian Sayin, and both of them, like, if you look at their stats, I mean, I'm not saying they were bad, but they also weren't like great or anything. And it just shows when you're putting two Heisman finalists in an uncomfortable position, and in the game where, despite all the defensive storylines, it was billed as, is this the game that basically wins the Heisman pretty much? That just shows how important defense is, especially in in a conference like the SEC or Big Ten, especially, and especially if you're trying to win games in the college football playoff and be the national champion. So, and especially just seeing just Indiana's ascent from being the losingest program ever to number one. Like, is that something any of us ever thought we'd be saying in our lifetimes? The Indiana Hoosiers, and no disrespect if there's any Hoosier fans listening here, I love the Indiana story. Like, don't get me wrong, but is that ever something you'd think you'd expect in your lifetime? I have a friend in Indiana, and he will not shut up, and rightfully so. And he is like soaking it all, because I don't think he can fully believe it too. So, but it just shows, like, if you can get the right guys like Curt Cignetti has done, you can basically work your way from being just one of the worst programs ever to number one heading into the CFP, which is really impressive. And it just shows, like I said, just how important the defensive line is, as we've all agreed.
So I've mentioned this before during the season, but I think we need to just hit on it again now that Indiana's 13-0, and as Crash mentioned, number one. It would have been hugely impressive. It would have been amazing. Like, we'd be singing Curt Cignetti's praises just if Indiana was, a number 10 seed for the second straight year. That was Indiana's playoff seed last year, lost to 7th seeded Notre Dame in the first round. Indiana just getting to the playoff 2 years in a row would have been ridiculous. But Big Ten champion, taking down Ohio State in December with everyone watching and being the number one seed. I did a show last night, Monday night, with Mark Rogers. We went on for 4 hours because we got a lot of super chats, kind of envious. But it was a 4-hour show, and like, Mark Rogers, he's written a book, he's written a book on, disputed national champions in college football history. Like, he went year through year, before the BCS, before the playoff era, and like, he did the research, and he goes into the weeds in terms of the schedules, the results, the different rating systems, and everything. It's a great book. Mark Rogers, Disputed National Champions. You want to buy that book, support the voice of college football. But like, the point being, Mark Rogers is a legitimate college football historian. Like, he's looked through the 155 years of the sport. He goes through programs year by year, decade by decade. In the off season, like, he will look over programs' trajectories, their results, how they did in bowl games, how they did against ranked teams. He crunches those numbers. He does it every year. He's always reevaluating, like, what is a top 5 program? What is a top 10 job for a coach? He does all those things all the time. That's the slogan of the voice of college football: no off season. Mark Rogers is, always working really hard. And as a supreme historian of the sport, someone who, breathes, lives, eats, sleeps college football 365, 24/7, Mark Rogers could not come up with another example of an instant, dramatic coaching turnaround as what Curt Cignetti has done. And I have to agree with him. Like, examples that I'm familiar with as someone who's, started watching college football in 1981, who started covering the sport professionally in the year 2001. I'm aware of Barry Alvarez at Wisconsin, Nowhereville to consistent winner. Bill Snyder at Kansas State. Kansas State was god awful in the mid 1980s, and Bill Snyder had that program competing for national championships. A few other examples you could readily come up with as well. Howard Schnellenberger at Miami, but none of those guys did it in just 2 years. Getting a program to the very top of the mountain, conference champion in a power league in 2 years, with that level of non-existent tradition, non-existent heritage, pedigree, whatever word you want to use. Like, the historians agree on this. It's not just me. It's not just Mark Rogers. Like, you ask college football historians, you put 50 historians in a room, almost all of them are going to tell you, yes, this right here, right now, what we're living through with Curt Cignetti is the most amazing first 2 seasons at a program in the 156-year history of college football. So I say that not just to say that Curt Cignetti's setting the gold standard that USC and Lincoln Riley and others need to follow, but then, how's he doing it? We need to be asking about that. And to me, Ethan and Crash, he's not doing crazy things. He's not tricking people, right? This is not Steve Spurrier at Florida, fun and gun and swinging gate and Emory and Henry and all those weird, funky formations and subbing out quarterbacks play by play. No, this is not a gimmick. This is as subtle as a punch in the teeth that Indiana's just going to hammer you right between the eyes. A little Kevin Harlan there on a dagger 3. That's what Indiana does. They just hit you with a hammer. They hit you with a shovel. There's nothing subtle about this. It's guys play tough, guys play hard, guys don't quit, guys are focused, they know their assignments. If Curt Cignetti can take 3-star guys and James Madison transfers and do this, my God, what? It's not just even a USC thing with Lincoln Riley. Why can't anyone else do this? This is absolutely freaking amazing. Comments, Ethan and Crash.
I do think, I mean, it's a mystery. We're not in the room. We're never going to figure out exactly what's going on. And he's
just to interrupt. He's not reinventing the wheel. This is not, some funky mystical thing. It's just we're tougher than you. Period.
Yeah, and so I think the best explanation that I can come up for this whole transformation is it seems to be culture related. And I think the thing that kind of sparks that idea, that thought in my mind, is I really liked a post-game interview, not directly post-game, but Fernando Mendoza went on the Pat McAfee show, I believe the day after. Obviously, Fernando Mendoza, Indiana's Heisman candidate quarterback. And they asked him about a play early in the game that got him knocked out of the game, where Caden Curry just absolutely obliterated him. And he was like, I loved it. He was like, that's football at its finest. I love competing. I want to get hit. I want, I don't want other teams to treat me, specially or to, kind of play soft against me because I'm the quarterback. I even though I got just completely obliterated and the wind knocked out of me and, and my ribs hurt, my shoulder hurt, and I had to go to the sideline or whatever. I could still, even in the moment, appreciate that as a very good football play. And I was just like, man, this guy's a Heisman candidate quarterback. He's potentially going to be a first-round NFL draft pick, and he's excited to get hit. It's just such a rare thing these days for players at quarterback and at the skill positions to just love football for the hitting side of it. And so I think that's probably something that is kind of permeating throughout the Curt Cignetti culture at Indiana, is just this, this just love and appreciation for football as such a physical sport, because they play a really physical brand of football over at Indiana. So I would assume that kind of starts at the top. I mean, Curt Cignetti is very clearly someone who's not afraid of confrontation, not afraid to He's a very self-confident person. The "I win, Google me" uh, quote went very viral when he said it. And so I think that there's probably a lot of confidence just kind of permeating throughout that Indiana locker room. So that's kind of what I would say. Just generally, I always love listening to Fernando Mendoza's interviews. The kid's a riot. Absolutely super intelligent guy, great personality. But yeah, that really struck me. Just his like, and it was clear he wasn't faking it either. Like he could barely contain his excitement talking about a play where he got completely obliterated. Like it's a play that you would think would make him really frustrated, but he was like excited to talk about it. It was so cool and so interesting. So that's kind of my thoughts on that.
I think my thoughts is I want to focus on Curt Cignetti actually, because I kind of nerd out once in a while. If interesting coach catches my eye, I will Google him and read their entire Wikipedia page. That's just what I do. And like sometimes in my free time, like I nerd out over coaches and their histories. So naturally, as Curt Cignetti's going viral for saying, "I win, Google me." That caught my attention, and I just obviously started Googling him. Like I said, I have a couple of friends that I use. So, hearing from them, seeing them just, really enjoying the last couple of years of football. It's been kind of cool to see. But just really what shows me is like, obviously he was on Nick Saban's staff for a while. And obviously impressive run through the ranks. And something that struck me, I learned, is most of the coaches that he has employed, a lot of them have been with him for most of his head coaching journey. I mean, obviously there have been a few like Tino Sunseri who left and then didn't really work out at UCLA. There have been a few who've left for other opportunities, but most of the coaches, he makes sure they're taken care of, really cares about just their well-being, and that they're not just, trying to do a bunch of overnights at the office, that sort of thing. So he really cares about their work-life balance. But then also I think you got to look at the guys he's brought through, which is super impressive considering a handful of those guys at James Madison probably played a year or two in the FCS, moved up to the FBS with James Matt when the Dukes did, and then possibly helped set the foundation in that year one at Indiana, which I think just is super impressive that there were possibly guys who were playing FCS and just worked their way up with him, and how many guys he was able to bring in and really set a solid foundation. Then I think recruited well. Obviously got Fernando Mendoza to buy into that vision, which was huge after how well Mendoza did, especially in his 2 years as the starter at Cal. So really when you just factor in everything about Cignetti, him just being part of the Nick Saban coaching tree, and then really having to take a pay cut to get a head coaching job at IUP at the D2 level, and then working his way back, and has Indiana positioned not just well this year, but possibly well in the years to come. And just thinking about just if there's that potential split, Super League forms, whatever comes next, as we all inevitably know. We all know something's happening. We don't know what. Crazy to think he's got Indiana in a position where they could possibly be included in that upper tier of the hierarchy in whatever comes next. So just really just such a fascinating guy, just everything he's accomplished and how he's got Indiana possibly winning the national title this year.
So two things about Cignetti. One is the confidence that Crash mentioned. Google me, I win. Like most coaches do not talk like that. And I did not intentionally mention Steve Spurrier earlier, but like Cignetti really is kind of a modern day Spurrier. I'd also say Lane Kiffin. Like they're two very different guys, but they both have Spurrier's, I'm going to let it rip. I'm going to say exactly what I think. I don't really care what you think. I'm just going to tell my truth. I'm going to do it my way, my style. Like I'm not a conformist. I'm not going to, bend the knee to anyone else. Cignetti's kind of a modern Spurrier just in terms of that boldness, that absolute fearlessness, and disregarding what anyone else in the room might think. So there's that confidence that makes people want to run through a brick wall for him. I think that's pretty obvious. But here's the other side. On Twitter, on social media, you'll see tweets with photos about Cignetti, and it's that sneer, that scowl, like, he's just, the Iceman. And then you'll look below and on the Peacock, NBC, whatever graphic, Indiana 35-3, third quarter. Like they're already blowing the doors off everybody. And he's still just, know, just he's staring nails through your soul. And so that conveys a simple point. He doesn't put up with any crap. Like accountability. That's what I mentioned earlier in the season when I had the Cignetti, Lincoln Riley conversation. Curt Cignetti gets accountability from everyone in the room. And one of the reminders about being a head coach, and Crash, in terms of Googling coaches and their histories, like you're probably aware of, Bear Bryant in the tower at Alabama, looking over the practice fields and seeing the operation. And a lot of that is he wasn't looking at the players, he was looking at his assistant coaches, because the head coach needs to coach his assistants. You coach your coaches. That's quality control. That is how you get a consistent operation where every position group, every player is being coached to your specifications. But obviously, you can't coach all the players on your roster at one time. You need your coaches to be coaching the right way, and you need to be monitoring your coaches so that they are providing the granular on-the-ground coaching. So that's Bear Bryant in the tower at Alabama. Bobby Bowden was another one of those guys, from an old enough time in college football history. He'd be in the tower looking over the whole practice operation. He'd be watching his coaches as much as he was watching his players. Curt Cignetti coaches his coaches. He coaches his assistants to get that same uniform and high standard throughout the room. And so with Lincoln Riley, do any of us think that he doesn't put up with any crap? Do any of us think that, the buck stops here and when we nip it in the bud, you make one mistake, fine. You're not making a second mistake. Like, that's Curt Cignetti. Indiana looks like, an ordinary team the first 2 to 3 weeks of the season. Cignetti schedules the cupcakes, and he's okay with those early season mistakes. But by golly, when Big Ten play starts, and Indiana beat Illinois by 53 in the first Big Ten game 4 weeks into the season, like, when it's go time, Indiana's ready and it buttons things down. So like that's accountability. You don't put up with the BS. You don't put up with slacking around, cutting corners, not having the details nailed down. That really, to me, is the not so secret sauce of Curt Cignetti. Again, he's not reinventing the wheel, but he gets accountability. That really is what USC has to get from Lincoln Riley. Not just Riley himself in terms of not putting up with BS, but also coaching his coaches, coaching his assistants, especially on the defensive side of the ball, and saying, guys, we can't have mediocrity. We can't be drifting through September. Like, it can't take us 8 to 12 games to figure certain things out on defense. And even then, only in the second half. Like, we play a sleepy first 20 minutes in late October, early November, against Nebraska, against Iowa. Accountability is the way forward for USC. And Curt Cignetti holds up a mirror to the USC program and its deficiencies. That's where USC needs to go. All right, more on the other side. We're going to talk about the awards. Mekhi Lemon, Jeremiah Smith. We're also going to talk about the Heisman Trophy, which is coming up. And another thing we're going to talk about, Notre Dame and the ACC. Wow, that cat fight. Could it explode? Could Notre Dame's ACC football scheduling agreement go kablooey? Does that give USC more leverage in negotiating the series with Notre Dame? And does this give USC visions of perhaps going independent? That and more on the other side of the break. But first, of course, a word from our sponsors. We'll see you in a minute.
College football is even more exciting when you've got some action on the line, and the games are even better when you're cashing in. And the voice of college football is the place to be to get the greatest value. Start with my picks. 75% against the money line, 58% against the spread, and I've got a 40-plus year track record. 11-0 in the college football playoff for me last year against the money line, 8-3 against the spread. And I'm just the warm-up act. Steve Merrill of Wager Talk is our ace in the hole, show stopper. 7 years with the voice of college football, over 30 years in the industry. Steve gives us analysis on all the big games, but you can't miss Steve's weekly under-the-radar pick. 28-12 against the spread the last 3 years. You also get picks from some of our top analysts here at the Voice of College Football, including Corey Bratta, Matt Zemek, and Steve Dace. Check out those numbers. Become a YouTube or Patreon member for just $99 per month. Go to the main channel on YouTube, click join, and then select the betting tier. Do the same thing on Patreon. Make 2025 a winner now.
And of course, you can catch Mark Rogers 6 nights a week, Mondays through Saturdays, 10 p.m. in the East, 7 p.m. in Los Angeles, and the rest of the West here at the Voice of College Football. A reminder, go to vocfb.com/shop. Get Ethan's lovely camo USC cap. You get a USC branded VOCFB piece of merchandise that supports the USC channel and the Voice of College Football. And then, of course, the other thing that we definitely want to mention, we interviewed former USC quarterback, Cody Kessler, and we gave you a freebie. We talked to him for a little over half an hour. So we gave you 15 free minutes, but we also put 17 minutes behind a paywall, part of our bonus cuts. So you see it right there, bonus, Cody Kessler. You can find that on our videos page. This is the video tab. You go to the home segment. It doesn't have that bonus segment up, but you go to the videos tab. Then you'll see the bonus segment. So that's for members at the middle Heisman tier or the top national champion tier. But here's the free one, the free 15.5-minute video. Cody Kessler talks about his USC career. But Cody Kessler on the college football landscape, that's the bonus cut. So you go to the top of the homepage, the Voice of College Football, and right there, you get the pop-up. You click the join button. You get the pop-up, Heisman tier, national champion tier. That's where you get the exclusive insider access to the bonus cuts. Bring your fork and knife. That's what Ethan, Crash, and myself have been producing. We'll continue to provide those bonus segments for the members here on the USC channel at the Voice of College Football. It's another way to help us out. All right, so award season, Biletnikoff, Mekhi Lemon, Jeremiah Smith, and here's my take. And I'll pass the baton to Ethan and then Crash for your opinions. But, Jeremiah Smith, Ohio State scores just 10 points, like against Indiana, on merit. On merit, I would cast my vote for Mekhi Lemon. No, I'm not a voter, but just on merit. Like Mekhi Lemon did more. He set the bar higher. He did more to lift his team. Ohio State was beating the Little Sisters of the Poor, and Arch Manning was atrocious in week 1, and Ohio State scored just 14 points in that game. Like, this is a defense-led Ohio State team all the way. Mekhi Lemon did more for USC than what Jeremiah Smith did for Ohio State. So I would vote for Mekhi Lemon. But now, who should win and who will win? It's a common theme in awards, isn't it? That what you think should happen is not what actually happens. I'm thinking that, because Ohio State's number 2 seed, college football playoff, and is the more successful program right now, that it's going to be Smith winning the award. But I would certainly cast my vote for Mekhi. Ethan, Crash, your takes on the matter.
Yeah, I think that Mekhi Lemon is pretty clearly the guy who should be winning the award. I mean, all due respect to Skylar Bell and Jeremiah Smith. I read about this today at Trojans Wire. Skylar Bell, ultimately, I'll just talk about him briefly, is going to be the Nick Nash of this year. Like, he has the better numbers, but, obviously UConn's smaller school playing against easier defenses. That doesn't work for the Biletnikoff committee these days. Obviously, last year you had Nick Nash, who had the best statistical season, but Travis Hunter ended up winning the award because he played at a Big 12 school and, oh, by the way, played on the defensive side of the ball as well. So, hope he has a great career, but obviously not, going to be his year there. I think, the conclusion that I came to today at Trojans Wire is Mekhi Lemon's really been better in every category. Just kind of any way you want to slice it. He has more yards per catch, and this is in one less game as well. More total touchdowns if you factor in his 2 rushing and 1 passing touchdown as well. Just there every statistical category, every way you slice it up. And also, Mekhi Lemon has had, more Biletnikoff-worthy performances, like it feels like every Heisman candidate has to have their Heisman moment. You could point to several for Makai Lemon. You could point to, him just being the MVP for USC against Illinois. You could point to, his performance against Iowa is probably the one that's going to stick in the minds of most people. Also had a great catch against Michigan. Like, in a lot of USC's bigger games, he really stepped up and played well. He wasn't necessarily super consistently clutch. There were games he disappeared. Nebraska comes to mind. But him and Jared, I think it's pretty easy. I don't really see any way that you can give it to Jeremiah Smith over Makai Lemon, because Makai Lemon was the better player statistically, passed the eye test, has the better highlights, had the bigger moments, against basically relatively the same schedule. In fact, if you really look closely at USC and Ohio State's schedules, I think I'd argue that USC's played better defenses than Ohio State has. But the only real reason you give it to Jeremiah Smith is, number one, name recognition, which is probably going to factor in a lot to this, unfortunately. And number two, because his team's better. If you want to make this like an MVP award, even though it's not, and it shouldn't be, it should be about the player who had the best season. This is not the Heisman. It's not the NFL MVP. It's the best wide receiver award. So, but anyways, you could make some weird argument that Jeremiah Smith deserves it more because his Buckeyes are better. But he's clearly a less valuable member of that team that's so much better. I mean, the defense has carried Ohio State, as we've very clearly litigated on this podcast. So I'm giving it to Makai Lemon 10 times out of 10. And if he doesn't get it, it's pretty clear that people aren't doing their homework, in my opinion.
I absolutely agree with everything Ethan's saying, and I do want to add this to your what you've been saying about Ohio State's defense. Keep in mind, new defensive coordinator this year under Matt Patricia. Sure, they had a lot of guys coming back, but obviously, people were a little concerned, like when Ryan Day decided to replace Jim Knowles with Matt Patricia. And I gotta give credit to Patricia. I was kind of skeptical, especially considering kind of how he flamed out in the NFL. But he comes in, does an A+ job with that Ohio State defense. Like you said, Matt, they made Arch Manning very uncomfortable in the first game of the season. But then I think you got to factor in nothing against what Jeremiah Smith has done this year. And then same goes for Skylar Bell too, especially just what's going on at UConn. I mean, Jim Mora leaving for, the Colorado State position should tell you a lot about just the state of that, how that program has been doing over the last few years. But back to the debate between Smith and Lemon. Just obviously Smith has had some good plays, but Makai Lemon, like you said, Ethan, was the guy. Like when USC needed something big, Makai Lemon was the one who stepped up, and he was the one they relied on. Like everybody knew. Whereas Ohio State, Jeremiah Smith played well, no denying it, but it was usually Ohio State's defense who stepped up. And then I also just, like you said, I think just a lot with the stats. Makai Lemon has some of the best stats of any receiver in the Power 4. And that better count for something. So if Makai Lemon doesn't win, I will be extremely outraged. So that's why I'm saying Makai Lemon should win and will win the Biletnikoff Award in 2025.
Crash throwing the sword, plunging it into the ground. Boom. Making his statement. And we will see if justice is served for Makai Lemon when the Biletnikoff Award is handed out. All right, got to get to the Heisman. And I've said this before, but it's worth saying one more time because we have the award ceremony coming up on Saturday. Heisman discourse, Heisman debates, they've just gone, they're so bad. They've gone downward consistently. We can't say that this is a mediocre 2026 NFL draft quarterback class, which it obviously is, and then yet turn around and say, oh, a quarterback is the best player in the United States for 2025. It's inconsistent. You can't have those two realities together unless there's kind of like just one outlier who's so amazingly awesome that, there's this terrible QB class, but this one shining exception. No, I mean, you can't say that Fernando Mendoza is the best player in college football when he's obviously not the best player on his team. That's the Indiana defensive line. Pick a defensive lineman for Indiana. That's the best player on the Hoosiers, and it's similar with Julian Sayin, that Ohio State's best players are defensive linemen, not Julian Sayin. And I think Mendoza and Sayin would agree with that. I don't think they'd even dispute that. I'm not the best player on my team. It's one of my defensive linemen. So the idea that a quarterback should win is just crazy pants. And Jacob Rodriguez of Texas Tech not even being a finalist, like the bias against defensive players in the Heisman Trophy continues to be a thing. Ndamukong Suh was clearly the best college football player in 2009, and Mark Ingram, who had a good year but hardly an amazing year, got in because, well, Alabama always gets the benefit of the doubt. Hello, happened again on Sunday. And playing in the national championship game that season against Texas, name recognition, just lazy BS, and an elite defensive player not given the Heisman. For older people in the room, like Bob Springer, Hugh Green was the best college football player in 1980. But George Rogers of South Carolina won the award over Hugh Green. Interesting note there. Hugh Green's Pitt Panthers played George Rogers' South Carolina Gamecocks in the 1980 Gator Bowl. Final score, Pitt 37, South Carolina 9. Yes, Hugh Green was the best player, but he played defense, so they gave the award to the running back, George Rogers, in 1980. So this is not a new thing. Pro QB bias, anti-defense bias in the Heisman. My vote of the 4 finalists would go to Jeremiah Love of Notre Dame, and it's not because he ran right through USC. It's because he ran the ball really well when his quarterback was struggling. So that tells me Jeremiah Love is an aircraft carrier. He's a dude. Like, that is the elite standard we should want from a Heisman Trophy winner. And some USC fans will say, oh, you can't vote for a Notre Dame guy. Come on, we're just evaluating players. Like we're taking the school affiliations out of this. We're just trying to arrive at the right Heisman winner. I would be happy with, Jacob Rodriguez winning the award, but he's not there. So Jeremiah Love. Ethan, Crash, your 2025 Heisman Trophy vote and closing argument.
I agree with you wholeheartedly that Jacob Rodriguez should be this year's Heisman winner. I mean, 114 tackles. I think he had 7 forced fumbles and 4 interceptions, 6 pass breakups, just all over the field. He was such a game wrecker. And it's a 12-1 Texas Tech team that's in the college football playoff. Like, I just don't see how the value is obvious. It's evident. He stuffed the stat sheet. You don't have to have watched all of Jacob Rodriguez's games to just so clearly see how valuable that he was. But it is what it is. I think, my vote probably goes to Jeremiah Love as well, just because he passes the eye test. Like you said, he tore up USC. I think he had 21 all-purpose touchdowns this year, which set some sort of Notre Dame record for a non-quarterback or something like that. And then, just passes the eye test in terms of being very dominant. He looks like one of the best players in college football. And you can't really say that for any of the rest of the guys who are nominated. I think it'd be interesting if Diego Pavia won, just because he's such an interesting story and such an interesting figure in this era of college football. He kind of has the attitude and the mindset of like another Johnny Manziel. Obviously, has created this whole shift with JUCO players now being able to play more games. Has really helped this Vanderbilt, team that was so bad for so long, almost make the playoff this year. So, it'd be an interesting storyline. It would be an interesting kind of footnote in college football history if Pavia won. I'm not really against any of these guys winning as people. Like I mentioned earlier, I love Fernando Mendoza. He's a hoot. But I think, it is clear, like you said, that the best player isn't going to win this year, because I think the best player was Jacob Rodriguez. And, if they don't give it to Jeremiah Love, which they probably won't, because it's become mostly a QB award, unless you do something like Travis Hunter did last year, then they won't even give it to the best guy out of the 4. So something needs to change. And it feels like we're saying that nowadays about so many different categories in college football, from the AP poll to feels like people are just getting really lazy about watching the sport, which is supposed to be fun. So I don't really know where that divide is happening, but hopefully we can get that fixed.
So I definitely think I think Pavia and Love are definitely warranting of being finalists. I definitely agree. Like, we've kind of talked about with these guys, especially Julian saying, where it's like they're trying to ease him in. So it's like, how can you ease a guy in and suddenly he's a Heisman finalist? Yeah, he put up impressive numbers, but isn't, like we've said, the best guy on the team. And I remember I made this point a few weeks ago of saying that I feel like the Heisman's become kind of corrupted. So really, I'd love to, even though I get what you guys are saying about Jeremiah Love winning it, and definitely helps make it show that unless you're a Travis Hunter type or Charles Woodson type who can play both sides of the ball, it really, I think, help. I definitely think, though, it should go to Diego Pavia. I think it's obviously an interesting storyline, but also just how, like you said, Ethan, he has turned Vanderbilt around. Like him coming there and just really helping flip the script there of just showing that and show Vanderbilt's commitment to winning. And just obviously, you mentioned he's like Johnny Manziel. Need I point out, he has been hanging out with Johnny Manziel. Johnny Manziel is now a Diego Pavia fan. Like, I think Johnny was repping, I think, Pavia's jersey when Vanderbilt when Vanderbilt went and played at Alabama. And like, that just shows that he's kind of right there in there with that hype. So I think Pavia, I just think for what he's done, because I look at the award as, I think obviously your individual stats matter, but also what have you done with your team? And I think there's certainly argument to be made there with Jeremiah Love, but that's why I really like Diego Pavia. Sure, they didn't make the playoff, but I think with how he has played this past year and just really elevated just Vanderbilt as a whole, I think to me it's clear that he should get it because of just that elevation as well as just his impressive stats. And then also, like you said, Ethan, he definitely does have the swagger that you kind of got to have if you are going to be the Heisman Trophy finalist or Heisman Trophy winner.
Yeah, well stated, Crash. You can say with Pavia that he's the reason his team wins, just as Jeremiah Love is the reason Notre Dame wins. Fernando Mendoza and Julian Sayin are not the number one reason Indiana Ohio State wins, those defensive lines. So I will be okay with Pavia winning. I will be upset if it's Mendoza. We will see on Saturday. All right, now we turn to a different Notre Dame topic, and that is the cat fight. Notre Dame and the ACC. They hate each other. They're spitting venom at each other. They are hissing right now. It's getting nasty. We will see if Notre Dame and the ACC can kiss up and make up. But if they don't, here's a thought. I'm not predicting anything, but I'm just saying, if it all falls apart, if Notre Dame's ACC football scheduling deal collapses, if Notre Dame rips that up, you have Florida State and Clemson, who are already, like, they don't want to be in the ACC. They want to go to the Big Ten, but if they can't go to the Big Ten, now that they don't get to play Notre Dame, what do they have? Now, Clemson might have its own exclusive arrangement with Notre Dame, but Florida State doesn't have the exclusive agreement. So, like, Florida State, if Notre Dame and the ACC rip up their scheduling agreement, I can see Florida State wanting to become independent. And as soon as you see another major school such as Florida State go independent, like we talked in previous weeks about USC and Michigan having the clout and the resources to go independent if they want to. And so the basic question for Ethan and Crash is, if Notre Dame and the ACC, divorce, and like Notre Dame pulls all its teams out of the ACC and rips up the football scheduling agreement, how might the dominoes fall? And could that inspire certain prominent schools to go independent? And maybe in like 5, 6, 7 years, could we bring the band back together? Could we bust up these 16 or 18 team conferences and go back to how it was? Or maybe some other possibilities will emerge. Ethan, Crash.
Oh, man, I'm so excited to talk about Notre Dame today because it's just been such a mess, Matt. And Crash, it's been so like, their true colors are really showing, and it's been glorious to watch. I mean, you have to be a real soft operation to do the things that Notre Dame's been doing in the aftermath of them getting snubbed from the college football playoff. Like throwing a hissy fit and not playing in a bowl game, like, getting mad at a conference for promoting its own team over you. Like, You're not in a conference. Like, what are you talking about? You're expecting you want all the benefits of being affiliated with the ACC, but you're not willing to throw in throw in your just operation with them. Like what I don't understand the delusion there. And man, like the things that have come out too about how like next year there's a clause where if they're ranked in the top 12, they automatically make the playoff. And like, oh, it's just so it's and their schedule next year. Oh, it's so it just sickens me. Like it's without USC in there, who do they even play? They play like Miami and Wisconsin and like just a whole bunch of Rice, a whole bunch of just randos. So like I don't know. I don't really want to see a future where we have a bunch of Notre Dames because Notre Dame is kind of being exposed for what they are right now, which is a school that's really trying to game the system and make it to where they just get to kind of cakewalk their way into the college football playoff, and if they don't get their way, they're going to throw a whole big fit about it. Like, we should compare Notre Dame to Vanderbilt actually, because Vanderbilt's another team that's been very outspoken that they believe that they should have gotten a shot at making the playoff at 10-2, and didn't. But Vanderbilt's rhetoric is just so much better. Like they're like, hey, like this past weekend during conference championship weekend, they were like, we will play anybody. We will pack our bags, like anybody who wants to play us in an extra game so that we can like make our case further to the college football playoff committee, like set whatever location, whatever time this weekend, and we'll go out and play that game. And then after they ultimately didn't happen and they ultimately didn't make the playoff, they've said we're all really sad about it, but we still recognize that we failed. Like there were 2 games that we needed to win that we didn't win. And if we win one of those 2, we're in the playoff, and we didn't do that. So it's really on us. So I think that there are a lot of potential dominoes, obviously, that could fall if this whole thing blows up. But I don't think that other schools should be looking at the way that Notre Dame is handling itself right now and going, yeah, we want to be like that. Like really, like it's completely changed the way I look at the USC Notre Dame rivalry beef, because before Notre Dame was doing such a good job of PR work where it was like, well, we want to play anybody. Like we're the national champions runner up. So we'll play anybody we want. And it's USC's fault. USC's the one who's trying to switch around the schedule on us. We'll play them anywhere, anytime. It's like there's no way that's actually the case. Like Notre Dame is definitely like now the way I see it is Notre Dame is definitely like being difficult on purpose, because if they lose USC, like it's just an easier cakewalk to the top 12 in the playoff. Like I don't know. So I think that this whole situation is a mess for Notre Dame. And I don't think that, like I said, I don't think that other schools should be looking at this and being like, yes, that should be us. I hope that, knowing Notre Dame, there probably won't be any real consequences for them. But I hope that, the college football world kind of evens out and people start to get a little disillusioned with, Notre Dame and this special situation they created for themselves.
All right. Before I turn it over to Crash, Ethan, that's your next Trojans Wire think piece. That Notre Dame was saying, well, we'll play USC anytime, anywhere, anyhow. And now it's, we're going to take our ball and go home. So that's your next think piece for Trojans Wire. Okay, Crash, floor is yours.
All right. So before I go into what I think about Notre Dame on this, I do want to point out a couple of things. One, I think the selection committee did a terrible job misleading them. Like, I don't really get the argument of, until they're actually head-to-head, then we got to compare them. Like, I don't know. It's Hunter Yurchek, but keep in mind, this is the same guy who ruined 6-7 and also posted a video of Eric Musselman at Arkansas without Muss's knowledge, too, and put Muss in a bit of a tricky situation before he left for USC. And so I want to get that out of the way. And then two, the other thing, I think that was fair that, oh my God, wait, now I've lost my train of thought, but I'll try to come back to it if I remember, but no, that's what it was.
Okay, I'll Crash while you regather.
I found it.
Okay.
Sorry. The other thing I want to say is, and I'm sorry if this upsets all the USC fans out there, I think Notre Dame should have been in the playoff over Alabama. And I say that because Alabama this year reminds me of USC in 2022, where granted it was the 14 playoff, but similar situation. We generally have all agreed that no three loss non-conference gets in, conference champion gets in. USC was the same thing, where if they had beaten Utah, they would have been in. But they lose after Caleb pulls his hamstring, and they lose pretty decisively, and that's enough for the committee to bump Ohio State in. So what happened there? Like, why does it change there and not there? So that's why I think Alabama should have been left out, and Notre Dame and Miami should have been in. But now, on to Notre Dame. So I think with the one thing that struck me as really interesting about what Pete Bavacqua said was, oh, the ACC, it's a terrible part. Like, they've ruined the partnership. Are you guys exactly partners in football? I mean, yeah, you got the scheduling agreement, but you're not exactly a member. And if you are, it is partners. Who's getting priority, the member or the partner? I think the member does. So I don't blame the ACC at all for promoting Miami, because the ACC's job is to promote the teams that represent its conference. And ultimately, you are going to make it about the money. Miami's going to get the ACC paid. Notre Dame gets Notre Dame paid. So I think that was kind of crazy. But then also, I think just the fact that they managed to get this clause into the contract is kind of crazy, that, oh, if they're number 12, they're in. Like, come on, play by the rest of the rules. Now, I don't think this doesn't change my opinion about the state of the rivalry. It needs to be played when it's traditionally been played at the locations that it's traditionally played at. No neutral site, no early September. Like, just USC does need to just, as Petrus said to me, just like, shut up, play the game. It's pretty much what he told me. But I think when you think of just how important, just what they're doing, I think it's just really dumb. They're walking out a bowl game. I mean, I haven't put too much thought to it. And if you know what, they don't want to play it. Not really thinking about, I'm not a Notre Dame fan, not really worth investing the time. But I think that just the fact that they've been able to get all this, I guess, all these crazy things that really just make them kind of seem like now they're really entitled, I think is kind of crazy. But then what was interesting, I read John Wilner at the Bay Area News Group this morning. He's saying, oh yeah, we can bitch, we can complain about Notre Dame. We can try to force them into a conference, but his argument is, if Notre Dame joins a conference, it's not going to be the ACC. They're only going to join the Big Ten, is Wilner's opinion. And basically, that's just going to cause more chaos and basically just make college football look even less like it is now. And so does Notre Dame possibly withdraw everything? I mean, it's kind of hard to see it. I mean, yeah, they're upset about this year, and yeah, they're going to complain for a minute, but I don't really see them. I mean, I think they'll be upset. Maybe they keep throwing a hissy fit. Maybe the ACC fires back, but I honestly don't see much changing. And it might be better if it doesn't, other than maybe just that egregious, just if they're in the 12th seed, they're in. Like, shouldn't it just be like they're just an at-large in general? Or they can join a conference, but I don't think they will, because I think this way they've set themselves up as an independent is very beneficial. And just because they're upset now, it's like they'll figure it out. I think, and if USC does play, it's not like teams aren't going to want to play Notre Dame. It is Notre Dame after all. I think the question is, will Notre Dame be able to face the music of having to play tougher opponents? So I think it's really interesting, but we'll see kind of how it all goes. But I think Notre Dame will find a way to craft a smart schedule. I mean, they've done it for years, and I'm sure teams would want to play that. Good teams would want to play them too if they got room in the schedule. So we'll see what happens, but I really don't think much is actually going to come of this.
I do think that USC gains leverage in negotiations in terms of getting the Notre Dame game on the terms that it wants, because Notre Dame needs USC, I think, a little more than it probably previously appreciated. You know, playing Purdue, Stanford, Syracuse, Boston College, you know, the lower gooey bottom of the ACC, that really hurt. You know, if Notre Dame had a better median win littered throughout its schedule, you know, things might have ended better for the Irish. I would not be shocked. I'm not predicting it's going to happen, but I would not be shocked if Notre Dame moves all its non-football sports to the Big Ten, because That's not an ESPN-owned conference. That's not an ESPN partner conference. I could definitely see that happening. It'll be really interesting to see how that plays out. One other thing that needs to be said about Notre Dame and the ACC. Miami got in, and that was the debate that we had, and that ran into the ground. But here's the thing, and this is what I talked about with Mark Rogers on the Monday night national show at the Voice of College Football. Again, it was a 4-hour show, so if you want college football talk, you can just go to that one. You can pretty much get everything on the national scene in the sport. But one of the things that Mark and I talked about was, the ACC had its, conference champion in the discussion, and the college football playoff had the policy of the 5 highest ranked conference champions get the automatic bid. So James Madison got that bid because 5 loss Duke was not one of the 5 highest ranked conference champions. So if the college football playoff had simply said 5 highest ranked conference representatives, not champions, just changing that one word in the policy, the guidelines, that would have closed the loophole. And also the ACC could say, you know what, we can crown our champion, Duke, but we reserve the right to pick the team that's going to represent our conference. Like every conference has the ability to do that. You can establish ground rules. The ACC could have had a ground rule saying if you lose more than 3 games, you're not eligible for the college football playoff. So this is the point I'm getting to. Miami got in, but Notre Dame's beef should not be with Miami. It's with James. It's with the ACC's tiebreaker system and the ACC creating its representative through the championship game, instead of saying we reserve the right to have our best team represent us in the playoff. That's how James Madison got in. James Madison took the spot that Notre Dame ordinarily would have had. 2 group of 5 teams got in. It's the Notre Dame's beef should not be with Miami and over that debate. It's with James Madison getting in, and it's because the ACC didn't create ground rules. But that's not the conversation you're seeing on a national level. But I make the insights that you're not going to get anywhere else here at the Voice of College Football. All right, folks. So we are going to continue to talk about the transfer portal at USC. Like that's going to be the main thing in December. Obviously, if there are any coaching moves, we'll talk about them next Tuesday at 7 p.m. in Los Angeles. But doesn't seem like there are any coaching moves on the horizon at USC. You know what? And we've got to the end of the show. Like, I don't know if you care about TCU. I know I don't. Like, it's not a matchup that really excites me. But that will be next week's show. We will talk about the portal, and we will deal with the TCU matchup in the Alamo Bowl. See what USC can carve out from that game. Looking ahead to 2026. So next Tuesday night, it's the portal and it's the Alamo Bowl against TCU. So for Ethan Inman and Crashlet Collier, this is Matt Zemek. Thanks for watching this week's Tuesday show on the USC channel here at the Voice of College Football. We will see you next Tuesday night. Fight on, everybody.